What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Armory. Today we're going to take our name pretty literally and talk about how to make a first-person shooter in GB Studio. This is not something you see too often, but it's doable and it's fun to think about how to put it together. So there's a lot of different remakes and demakes out there. There's a remake for Duck Hunter posted out there. So this is just a quick one that I came up with. So I'll take you through what kind of assets you need, how to program it, and the general framework for that as we go through. So the first thing you're going to need is a background. So this is all going to take place on one scene. So this is your standard 160 by 144 scene. So you can make the background whatever you want, but I will be using a heads-up display and tile switching to show you all some information. So the key thing there is that with the tile mapping that I'm using, my tile swap is within the 8x8 pixels, so each one needs to be unique to the scene, which you guys already know. But that's what these are. These are placeholders for the swap tiles. So this is my little heads-up display, and I ripped this from stock photos just to make it look cool. But really, you can make anything you want here. So I guess you could do this with a side scroller or a shoot 'em up. Maybe if you wanted to simulate some kind of helicopter ride where you're kind of shooting down. That gave me a decent idea for something, but I haven't tried that yet, but it seems possible with GB Studio. So this is really all you need if you're just going to do a one scene first-person shooter. So additionally, since we're doing a shoot 'em up, you would need, or excuse me, a heads-up display. You would need a background with these numbers on it. So I just have one that I have saved that goes from 0 to 100 in 8x8 tiles. So before we hop into it, I'm going to go over some basic framework for what you would need to think about before you get started. So let's really briefly talk about the framework you're going to want to think about, or have these things thought through or written down before you start. So this is going to be a first-person shooter, single shot. I may do a part 2 where it's more automatic. That requires a little bit of different programming since you want to hold the button down. But anyway, as you get into GB Studio, you're going to be using a point-and-click scene. That allows you to overlap a reticle with your target. Instead of a top-down, they will just bump into each other. So you're going to want to use a point-and-click scene. I'll reiterate that once we get back into GB Studio. So you're going to want to think about a few of these things. What's going to happen when you press the fire button? So you can have that be whatever you want. I'm going to do a more traditional route where you'll see a flash and a shake of the screen. But you want to program that once you hit the fire button, what's going to happen. Separately, you're going to have targets and actors that you have out on the field. So what is going to happen when those targets get hit? So within GB Studio, that's actually an interact script with the player. So keep in mind, you want something to happen even if you miss the player. You still want to show that you have fired. You want to show the player that you have fired the weapon. So that's why those two things are kind of separate. So in this first-person shooter, the targets are basically going to just pop around. They're just going to hop around randomly, which would make it a little bit more challenging for the player because they're not sure where they're going to pop up. Like I said, if I do the automatic one, we can talk about how you can move those actors relative once they hit a location, so that makes it even more challenging. But how are the targets moving? How are you going to move the targets around? So I'm going to achieve that by generating random numbers and setting positions based on those random numbers. Okay, next, when is your shooting complete? So there's really two things, right, that you could stop the player from shooting with. If they run out of ammo, or if they run out of a set time that you set for them. So that's something you want to think about when you program this. You could also stop them by having a certain number of targets hit. So the three things on my HUD heads-up display will be the things that you could stop the player from shooting. So that'd be targets, number of targets hit, a time, or out of ammo. So I'm going to basically do it by time. If the player runs out of ammo, that's their own problem. They're just going to have to sit there. So the last one, we talked about it a little bit already. How are you showing the player information? So heads-up display is pretty huge, but you don't want a text box popping up every time something happens. So heads-up display is kind of the way to go with tile switching. So if you're looking to be a little bit more advanced with it, that's a good place to start thinking. So these are the 6 things you want to think about before you even get into making your scene, because this will drive your background that I just talked about. So those are the 6 things you need to consider. Let's hop back into GB Studio. So we're back in GB Studio, and I'm going to follow my same outline that I just followed in the previous section, but I'm going to show you all practically how I have it set up in GB Studio. So as we said, I have 2 scenes. One's the background I showed you, one's the numbers. And we have 2 actors, which would be Alien 1 and Alien 2. And then we have some transparent actors here, which are that hot green color, just to keep track of different things. So we'll talk about that at the beginning. So we'll follow the bullet points that we had. So first, we said this needs to be a point and click scene. So the scene that you're using to do the first person shooter is going to be designated as point and click. Right there, too easy. So first we'll talk about what's the action when we're firing. What's the action when we're firing? So I have an event group set up here called firing. So if you don't know how to set up an event group, if you just do add event and you type in event group, you can just add, it's like a folder for your desktop. You can add all different kinds of commands under there, and then it's all in a nice, it's all in one area, it's all in one nice folder, and you can rename it so you can keep track of them. So rename event, name it whatever you want. So this one's called firing. So I'm using attach script to A button, and I will start with what happens if we have ammunition. So basically, if we have no ammunition, I don't want anything to happen. Very basic. But basically what I want is like a flash and a shake of the camera, and then I want the ammunition to go down by 1. So the commands we're using: show overlay, wait for 0.1 seconds, hide overlay, shake camera vertically for 0.1 seconds, and then take away 1 ammunition. Too easy. So as I said in other previous videos, I like to use math functions for this because I can't have the ammunition go to negative because I don't have a tile for that. So I'm going to clamp that between 0 and 225. If you use decrement, it will just keep going into the negatives, and then it won't be readable in this section. So that is what happens when I want to fire. So that happens regardless of whether I hit something. So that takes us into next. What happens when we hit one of these aliens? What happens when we hit one of these aliens? So what I did is I wrote a script. So this is already in here from the sample project. Wound up clearing the whole thing, but I made it a script called hit. So we set up this script so we can use it on both of these. So play sound effect. Really simple. I want to play the sound effect when this player gets hit, when this alien gets hit. And then within scripts, you have to use like variable A and variable B. And then when you call the script, you determine what those are. So what I want to happen is I want hits to go up by 1. So I write variable A. This is a math function now. This is under math functions. Okay. Variable A. Add value 1. So that's a math function. It's the same one as below. And I don't need to clamp that one because it's adding. And they're never going to get up to, it's never going to get up that high. And then I also have variable B. So what I want to happen when I hit one of these aliens is I want the position to change. So you can't just spam the position until it moves. So variable B, in my case, which I have set a locations variable set for either one, is going to generate a number between 0 and 4. Because when I hit these aliens, I want them to move. I don't want them to sit there because you'll be able to spam. You'll be able to spam them. and that's really not the point. So this is the general script of what happens when the enemies are hit by the target. So really simply, you go to that player and you go to on interact and you call the script. Oops. You call the script enemies/hit. So variable A, once again, we want to add 1 to that. That's hits. And then variable B for this player is player 1's location. Player 1's location. So this will feed directly into how are the targets moving around. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So player 2 gets the same treatment. Enemy/hit. Hits add to 1. Add 1 to hits, I should say. And once it's hit, I want player 2 location to generate a random number between 0 and 4. So how are the players moving around is our it's our fourth bullet point. So that's why I'm using these transparent actors here. So what I do is I make an actor with the hot green. So just so you can't see it, and it's just there just for on update purposes. So both players have one assigned to them. So player 1 moving around, that's another event group that I renamed. So I said if time equals 0, I just don't want anything to happen. We'll cover that once we get to how we're displaying information. But, so what happens is for player 1, every on update, going to wait for 1.5 seconds. And then another math function here, the variable is set to a random value between 0 and 4. Player 1 location. So remember, so every 1.5 seconds this is going to change, but also when we hit the player 1, it's going to change to another random number between those values. So what I have in each one of these are if statements, and that's if var equals value, or var compare to value. If variable compare with value. So I wanted to say if this variable equals 1, move my alien to this location, and I just put in random locations. Just moved them around with the arrows. So that'll give the illusion or the image that they're just hopping around. So same thing in this box, or excuse me, this box. Player 2 moving around. So every 1 second he's going to hop around, or if he gets hit, he's going to hop around as well. So that is how I am moving my players. There are probably other ways to do it, but that's how I'm doing it. And it makes it pretty challenging because there's a couple of players hopping around at once. So those are how the targets are moving. One thing I wanted to show you guys as well is your player. Your player here can be whatever you want it to be, but it can be a reticle style sprite that will give the player the appearance that they're shooting at an enemy. So this is just a regular sprite, 16 by 16, where I have this crosshair thing, but everything's transparent. So it just kind of looks like a scope or some kind of reticle that you can use. So that kind of rounds out how shooting and hitting enemies will occur. So the fifth one, how is shooting complete? So in my case, I want to have the player to have 20 seconds, and I want them to be able to see that 20 seconds. So I'll show you what I did in this one, and I'll show you another way to do it without actually showing them anything. Maybe you don't want them to know how much time they have left. But on our overall scene here, I have an event group called Setup Variables. So that initially sets all the variables when the player starts. So I want them to have 12 rounds, 0 hits, and 20 seconds. Or I just set this this is just a variable called time. Just a variable called time. So that command is set var to value. There you go. It'll find it for you. So what I did is I set a variable, just named time, to 20. Another way to do it, and I don't believe you can show this, is timer. Attach timer script. So I could type in here 20 seconds, And then on tick, I could say game over. I could do dialogue, game over, change scene. But I don't believe there's a way to display that. There probably is. Let me know in the comments if you know of a way to display that time. But this is another way to do it. So I have time 20. And leaning a little bit into the last bullet, like, how are you showing the player your information? I'm doing it with tile switching. So when the scene first starts up, it takes these numbers, and this GBVM script will take one of these numbers and put it in these boxes. So I said hits equal to 0. So what this is saying is telling my game to replace tile 116, which is right here, with the number that I set, which is 0. And look at variable hits and put this number here, right at the beginning of the scene. So that's what happens with hits, ammunition, and time. So in the case of time, it's going to pull this 20, this tile number 20, and put it right there for me. So that'll show the player you got 20 seconds. But we also need to keep that updated. So every time we hit something, every time we fire, and as the seconds go by, we need to keep that updated. So I have that done. I have some of that done here. So this is the commands that are keeping everything updated. So when I hit something, every frame is checking to see if I have another hit. So in the background, hit will go to 2, 3, 4, and this will just move it along as time goes by. Same thing with ammo and time. What I set up for time, though, is its own. Actually, I have a duplicate here, so I'm actually going to take this out. What I have set up for time is its own actor. So all I have it doing is wait for 1 second, math function, subtract 1 from time every 1 second, and then also update it. Same thing, so 916, just pulling the number of time. So it starts at 20, and every second it goes down. So that's what's occurring there. So then, really simply, if time equals 0, I'm just saying deactivate the players. Just turn them off. So the player will get the vibe that the game is definitely over. So that's all the information I want to show the player. So this is pretty important with a heads-up display. There's a lot of information I guess the player needs as far as these things, ammunition and time really probably being the most important. Hits, maybe you want to keep these things away from the player. Like, you don't want them to know how many hits they got or how much time they have. That's up to you. But this is just kind of the basics, depending on how your game's set up. So now that we've covered those 6 things, we'll just go ahead and start up the game so you guys can see kind of what it looks like. And don't crack on me for stinking at my own game. Alright, so I got 10 hits. I did not run out of ammo. My time ran out, but that's pretty much how you make a single shot first person shooter. Definitely think about those 6 things once you get this started. And there's probably other ways to do these things. This is just the way I do it. But those are really the principles of it, and that's really how you do it. I may make a part 2 on kind of automatic firing. I haven't decided that yet. I just want to show you guys too real quick. You can see the variables changing in the debugger. So that's always valuable. It's always valuable. You can make sure your code's working. If you don't see something that you want to see, you can check. So you can see everything kind of stopped once we hit 0. So that means everything's pretty much working. So I hope you enjoyed this, guys. Let me know any comments, questions in the section below, and catch you next time. Later.